welcome to the Tapped Out Wrestling Podcast. I'm Nick McDaniel. He's Myron Fancher. How the heck are you, buddy?
Well, you can see me, Nick. 25 years of being the butt of a horrible you can't see me joke. Nick. How did it end this way?
Well, look, man, that's, the big question that seems to be burning on everybody's mind. But hey, we want to remind everybody this week we are doing our usual, mixing it up. The special this week is another episode of the What Ifs in the world of pro wrestling. And you'd have known that, by the way, if you're a Patreon member over at patreon.com/tappedoutpod. We put it out there for people to send in some of their what ifs that they wanted us to talk about and stuff. But you would also, by the way, if you are a member on patreon.com/tappedoutpod, you get the show early, get it a whole day early. You do actually get the bonus content, a lot of the articles that we're writing, the Georgia Wrestling Spotlight, all that exclusive on patreon.com. But listen, we understand there are a lot of YouTube people out there at tappedoutpod.com. That is our YouTube channel. Make sure if you are a YouTube watcher, making sure you're liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, and of course, turning those notifications on. That way you don't miss a single episode. And you kind of get a heads up on these specials, whether it's going to be a what if, or is it going to be another, the real wrestling episodes, a lot of these other things that we're jumping into, mixing it up for you guys. And we hope you appreciate it. So if you do, let us know, tappedoutpod@gmail.com. Things you want different. We greatly appreciate that. But before we dive into this week's episode, Myron, as always, before we get started, we kind of talk a little bit about the stuff that kind of happened. And of course, we're recording on a Tuesday, and on Monday, here's the thing. I almost said Monday night. Actually, Monday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I forgot.
John Cena. Yeah. No, I didn't. I caught it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know you don't forget stuff like that, but I forgot, and you text messaged me as like, you see the promo? I'm like, oh well, well, I'll watch it in a little while. Crazy, this tour of Europe, crazy. Are we broadcasting in Europe? Are you releasing this in Europe? Because I want to get those European fans take on this on our.
Yeah,
podcast,
we do.
Man.
We have listeners over in Europe, but we have some other countries that are really really good.
Wrestling fans, hungry.
Yeah, the UK does well. France does well. Belgium, believe it or not, does every now it spikes into the top there or whatever. So yeah, so it gets a mix over there. But yeah, it was weird sitting I was sitting at the table at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and just kind of turned it on. That was kind of odd. But I bet you it was nice if you jumped in at 8 o'clock and it was already there to be watched the whole non-live edition. The commercial free if you're an ad-free person.
Mine had commercials in the commercial free version. I'm not sure why. I have not done research. Something I'm pretty sure my wife has done to get us commercials, because there were commercials on a Disney program the other day. I don't know what she's done to me. It's some kind of horrible haunt.
She's dropped your tears, man. She's
cost cutting me. But Lord, those arenas were packed full. Now, I don't know how they set those arenas up, so I can't judge them the way I can an arena over here. But they were, tall and narrow looking, and they were packed, and they were loud, and they were so loud the fans kept drowning out the promos and making them stop. But they gave John Cena hell. Oh my God!
So let me ask you this: were you at all surprised that the reaction he got when he came out? Because a lot of people thought, that the idea was like they haven't seen him in forever. They hardly ever go there. He's going to walk out, and it's like even a heel when they get injured, when they come back, they get a babyface pop.
Well, still, John Cena
did not.
Everybody had on, for people that hated him so bad, they all had on his merchandise. Now I know the kid was. How much do you think that kid was a plant? Okay,
99%.
99% that kid was a plant. But there were other people dressed like him all through the audience. There were other people that bought Cena in Belgium shirts, probably there at the event, went in the bathroom and put them on so they could be ready.
Yeah, those shirts it said Brussels right on the top. Like it was a shirt made for that show, like specifically. And we've seen this done before. Brock Lesnar, remember he had those shirts when it was like the city, Suplex City, and it would have the names of cities and stuff. So it's been done before, but smart on them to do
They
it.
just highlighted it so well with the Cena thing, man. And I was so, I don't know, I bought it and I was watching it. And this is where we had a debate prior to the show about the impact of this promo. I thought it was phenomenal. You thought it was okay.
It's pretty good. It was. But listen, here's the problem. John Cena has cut some great promos in his day. That's the problem. Like, it's like it was by far and away not his best promo he's ever cut. It was effective. It was pretty good. It was really good. Let me back. It was really good. It just wasn't great the second time I watched it. The first time I thought it was, but I realized I was giving him bonus credit for the crowd. And I think that was where I was going with it. I'm not saying, look, if somebody loved it and they thought it was great, awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I'm not saying it was bad. I think the crowd propped it up a little bit. Look, non-wrestling fan watched it and said, "Oh, he's just not good at this." Like, it felt forced or whatever. But my argument was, no, I think there's a part of him, and we always talk about heel turns. This is why I think it's effective. I think John Cena's getting to say things he's probably felt at some point throughout his career now.
Oh, it was all natural. That was the thing. This came from a place. The invisible joke, abusive relationship, the way he went through it, and it all hit me. I mean, he got me on some level. And sorry, sneeze. Allergies are hell right here, folks, after the tornado that blew through. But he got all his booze. Cody came out. The people in Europe already know the songs better than me. And they're in a different effing language. And they did it in Spain. They did it in Belgium. They know the songs to all the wrestlers better than me. Mm-hmm. And they're in different languages. LA Knight got massive pop. Did you notice that part?
Yeah.
But this whole promo, he sets it up, and Cody comes out there, and then Cody hits it off. I loved it. When the fans love it, there wasn't anything really done for 30 minutes coming into this show besides this promo. The first 30 minutes were the intro and this promo. No wrestling, nothing else. And then Michael Cole lost his shit, which is awesome to watch. Beautiful.
I want you to put the pause button in it right there, because you led me to something that I was going to bring up. I told you I was going to save something for the show.
Okay.
I think there's a reason that promo started the show.
Okay. We're here to find out why you think that.
I think it started the show. Well, we got to get rolling here, but I think the reason it started the show was because then they could adjust on the fly. There was no way they wanted to have it go out there at the end and be forced and rushed to get it in before they went off. Because, they may still have a time in their head that they were planning on. I know they can go if they want to longer on Netflix, but I think they were just like, look, we're going to go out there, and because we don't know what we're going to get with that crowd reaction.
Well, yeah, it's a great way to assess the crowd too.
It might be 15. It might be 15 minutes. It might be 20 minutes. It might be 30 minutes. By the way, here's the thing. I think they actually got through it faster than they thought, potentially, because the Seth promo was way too long.
Yeah.
He could have been done in 3 minutes, and he went like 15. So maybe he was filling time here. Maybe that was the issue. I don't know. But I think that's why they went on to because were you at all surprised, before we move on, that they led the show with it? Because typically that they do it at the top of the 10 o'clock hour, or it ends the show to make you sit there and watch the whole thing.
Yeah, I was because the main event wasn't that big a deal compared to the rest of the show. Compared to the promo, you could have flipped them and made more people watch the end. I was kind of tired by the time it came to the main event, but that was maybe they didn't know what to expect in Belgium. Maybe they march out the great litmus test out there to see this. This is what will. How does the crowd react to this? We'll know.
Yeah, but the problem is you could have literally completely exhausted them out of the gate, because they could have expended all of their emotion and energy in that first segment. That was why I was like, well, I think I get why, like saying, hey, we just about the time constraints or what, you just wanted to make sure, because how many times does John Cena go out there and he goes long, or The Rock when they go out there they go long or whatever.
I
Anyway,
needed a cigarette after that promo. I was
so
just, yeah.
hey, again, there was two other things I wanted to ask you about. One, some news came out this week where they're saying, like, look, the NXT TNA crossover may be paying off in more ways than one, specifically to the talents. They're saying that the guys, when they do the crossovers, they're being compensated for their time by the other. So, like, for example, when Moose and the Hardys were on NXT, like, they got compensated. When Cora Jade is on TNA Sacrifice, she's compensated. By the way, a really smart reason. There was a logical reason as to why some people believe this is the case. Is it enforces the independent contractor thing? Because WWE pays them to be over there. So are you letting your employee go work over there? Is that what you're saying? Oh, well, no. When they wrestle over there, they get paid by them because they're an independent contractor.
Yeah, I mean, that's another opportunity for somebody who's, I don't know how the exclusivity thing, how they get around that, but it's a big deal. It's something big now in wrestling where we're getting people working for other companies. I don't know how NWA is going to pay Natty, but that'll be figured out somehow. I think it's phenomenal that okay, let me phrase this carefully. I don't think it's phenomenal that they're still independent contractors. I do think it's phenomenal that they have an opportunity to make more money working in other places, especially the ones that aren't getting booked on TV as much. These have been heavily booked people so far. If you didn't watch Roadblock, folks, you need to check that out. That was a beautiful pay-per-view top to bottom. Or it was a regular, that's what NXT does. They put those on regular nights. And if it helps, if it avoids antitrust lawsuits, I'm sure these people are way smarter than me sitting in my basement in front of my pretend brick wall, knowing labor contracts for professional wrestlers and things like that. But I'd like to see it. I'd like to see more opportunities. I like these things. I like these chances.
I'm just happy they're being compensated. That's the bigger thing.
Yeah.
I mean, all that other stuff is, it's eye candy for fans, but yeah. I'm more yoked that they're getting paid for it.
Yeah.
The other note I wanted to hit you up with is, we had a talk a while back about Saturday Night Main Event, some counter programming. They moved a pay-per-view because of WrestleMania being in Las Vegas, which is the normal home for AEW. Now it's coming out that the June episode of SmackDown that was originally thought to be taking place in San Antonio in June has been pushed to July 18th. And everybody's like, why is that a big deal? Well, that's because it's 6 days after All In Texas.
Yeah. I don't understand why this is all about. I understand counter programming. Okay. If we were talking about, I almost said LA Law, because that was a super successful television program when we were kids. Okay. If these were two competitive television programs, like super competitive, I can see counter programming it. I can see trying to run them out of town. This isn't moving into a new territory and trying to run a promotion. This isn't, something between like Jerry Jarrett and Nick Goulas or some kind of, that might not even happen, but it's my point. This isn't a competitive promotions. This isn't an old promotion war. This isn't a broadcast television war. These people really aren't competing. Why counter program WWE? Why?
Listen, to be blunt, it could be a jerk move. To be a jerk move. Yeah. It is simple. Look, it's not because here's the thing. All In's the tickets have already gone on sale. Obviously, they're already over $1 million gate based on all the projections or whatever. So, what do you think? That's the other part. What do you think you're going to accomplish then by announcing the show now? Well, might hurt late walk-ups. Because, if you do mid-July, you're getting close to SummerSlam, potentially. So that means the SmackDown's probably going to be a hot SmackDown, especially if Roman Reigns is on there, The Rock's on there, or John Cena's on there, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. So,
but what the hell does $1 million gate mean in 2025, Nick? That's
That's a
not
pretty impressive. That's a pretty impressive number.
not with those giant arenas. I would think if the big seats, the expensive mark seats, there's the people that travel all over the place to see these shows. I mean, I would go. What's the WrestleTix number on this? Let me see if
Oh,
I
I
can.
mean, I haven't got. Yeah, I mean, I'm saying like even if you did the average seat at 50,000 or $50 a piece for this average, because the lower ones are super expensive, the high ones are usually typically super cheap. At $50, I mean that's 20,000 tickets already sold, and this thing's in July. I mean, and I mean I'm sure they haven't done that much or whatever. Um, but look, it's not just that. I mean, we like in the past we talked about Saturday Night Main Event on June 12th. It's probably potentially could even be head to head. Think about that. It could be a head to head show with this All In. So not only are you going to run a SmackDown 6 days after, what if you put a Saturday Night Main Event on the day of? That's there's that. The Battleground set for May 25th. That's potentially the same day as Double or Nothing in Phoenix. So like they're going out of their way. It appears as to actually be counter programming AEW. So the moral of the story is they're playing nice with everybody except them.
Yeah, and is that to prove you are competing against somebody? You're not a monopoly if you have to compete against somebody. That would prove that you're competing against someone and you are not a monopoly if you're counter programming and showing evidence of competition, like physical evidence, not just stuff. So maybe there's a lawyer. Maybe Nick Khan's got more law. Well, I know he's got more lawyers than money can buy. And then, what's the thing about the boxing thing they're starting in Turkey with Nick Khan and
Dana White? They're starting up their own boxing promotion, but it's partnered. It's funded essentially by Saudi Arabia. The money group there, the fund that they run over there. Yeah, they're gonna start their own boxing. The big reason, of course, is their argument is they're gonna get the matches that everybody wants because they're gonna pay that kind of money to get the matches that they want. It's one thing when you try to put it on here and promoters get involved and stuff, the pays sometimes get a little wonky and guys are like, it's not enough for me to fight this guy and potentially lose. But if they're both sitting there looking at $75 million paydays, they're kind of like, all right, I can take a loss. It's not the end of
I'll do the job. Okay.
Yeah, by the way, you asked, the current setup for that show is 18,140 tickets. They've distributed 12,137. There's 6,000 tickets left. And the show takes place in July.
Okay.
So.
Fair enough, July.
So that's not bad. It's not a bad day at the office. But anyway, man, hey, look, let's jump right into what everybody's here for. The wrestling's What If. Have you caught up on all of those? On the Marvel stuff? Have you caught all those?
Yeah, this last season was not good.
Yeah. It was not their best work.
We're doing a lot better job than the last season of What If. Okay, I hate to say that, Marvel and his name is not Oahu. That's a place in Hawaii, isn't it? His name is Uatu or Moatu. He's bald and he wears robes.
He's the Watcher. Just call him the Watcher.
Yeah, I could put on some bed sheets and sit down here in the basement and do that if y'all really wanted me to. But wrestling's What If to me is a lot more interesting right now. And you've got a doozy to start with, don't you, Nick?
Yeah. Hey guys, and we are going to do this, like I said, probably once a month. We're going to get into a rotation of all of the show formats and kind of cycle through them over time. So again, tappedoutpod@gmail.com. Continue to send in your questions, the what ifs, the scenarios, and things like that, and we'll go through them and just kind of like if we don't cover it, we'll try to push it to the next episode, and we'll do our best. But yeah, to start off this week, man, what if Bret Hart never left the WWE in #97? Wow. So now I'm going to set the table a little bit. I got some notes here to kind of set the table for everybody. Look, we get it, folks. A lot of people are pretty, familiar with what happened, but we're talking about in '97. Obviously, Bret had signed this big, massive deal. Vince comes back, says, hey, I can't really afford this 20-year deal anymore. It sets the table for him to renegotiate. And, of course, he takes the WCW deal, which, of course, leads us to Survivor Series. We get the Montreal screw job. All of it, but it leads. By the way, what do we get out of that? We get Mr. McMahon. We get the whole because Brett screwed Brett. He moves on. WWE kind of moves forward with Stone Cold, The Rock. They kind of move on, but because now Brett's out, they got to fill that hole, and then they start shuffling the chess pieces with Austin, The Rock, Triple H, etc. So the question becomes, Meyer, what if he doesn't leave? What if he stayed? Kind of what changes? Well, obviously, let's start at the first one. Well, obviously, if he renegotiates a deal with Vince, he doesn't, hold him. I mean, and look, Vince signed the thing. He wasn't holding him hostage, but you get where I'm going. If Vince is like, hey, I can't do this deal, Brett says, all right, let's renegotiate it. I just want to stay. Obviously, the screw job doesn't happen. So the question becomes, that is essentially what made Mr. McMahon. If we don't get Mr. McMahon, do we get McMahon Austin?
You don't get that entire era. Do we even get the Attitude Era at all? I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot that I'm missing here, Nick. I really am confused about some stuff on all this. The Montreal screw job.
Mm-hmm.
Was it because they were scared Brett was going to leave like Medusa did with the belt?
Oh, 1,000%. That was it. They were convinced. Brett had told them he would drop the title the next night on Raw or whatever, and they were like, can't take this chance because technically he didn't have his contract was done at the Montreal screw job. They were afraid he's going to take off. So he said, we just got to get the belt off of him, and boom. And look, it's infamously, Cornette takes some credit for it. Triple H now comes out and kind of says, well, I did kind of say, let's just screw him and take it off. So depending now who you believe.
Earl Hebner.
There's that whole thing creates a spiral out of like, if we don't get Mr. McMahon out of this, because like Austin, even though he became a guy, obviously, but the thing that made him, and let me ask you real quick, literally a short 60-second answer. This is what made Austin what I think he was the hottest superstar ever. I think he was the brightest star in a shorter period of time, if that makes any sense.
He blew up so big that people are still wearing his merch. His original Austin 316 merch.
Right. But no, I think he was the hottest star ever.
Yes.
The problem is we remember the Flairs and the Hogans and et cetera because they did it longer at a high
our
level.
mind, we remember it the way we saw it as children.
Yeah.
He blew up in the multimedia area. He blew up when wrestling was at its peak, when wrestling was on television every Monday night. He blew up when it was huge, and it got more people and it drew more attention than Flair and Hogan did prior to that. And this was just a absolute moment in wrestling that people identify with that till this day. Still,
because here's how the part two of that is. So Brett and Shawn, this is at Survivor Series. Remember back in the day, it was a little bit different with the pay-per-views and the big. They still had the other ones in between, but we could have still led to Brett and Shawn at WrestleMania, which keeps us from getting like Austin.
Yeah.
So this could have double affected Austin. Like, not only does he not have a Mr. McMahon, heck, he may not have needed a Mr. McMahon because he doesn't even get the position because Brett's still there filling in that slot, and he's the one still feuding with Shawn, and it doesn't eventually lead to that title change that Shawn drops it. So that's kind of crazy. Not to mention, you brought up the Attitude Era. Brett hated the Attitude Era.
Yeah.
Like, he hated the filthy, the, edgier content. He liked it all, so does he push back a little bit?
You could have seen all
tone it down.
You could have seen all kinds. You could have seen so many stars that we value that never got developed. So many stars that weren't necessary because Bret Hart was still there. Bret Hart, when he left, there was a massive hole that they had to fill through character development. And that brought a lot of the stars that we value so much today up the chain. And so Might have been best for the fans too. What happened after that, not best for Bret though, my
Yeah.
opinion.
Look, some people argue about him going to WCW. He was one of their biggest free agents. Quote, he wasn't technically a free agent, but picked him up. If they don't get him, I would suspect, because somebody sent this in, so I put it in the notes about, hey, they lost. Did it basically weaken WCW if they never got WCW? Nick's hot take of this episode is Bret going to WCW weakened WCW, in my opinion. They never fully look, whether it's Bischoff's fault or creative's fault or Bret's fault, because I've heard that narrative too.
Goldberg's fault.
Well, look, if he doesn't go to that, and is Bret wrestling way longer?
Well, yes, Bret could have wrestled much longer. He also could have been not the most miserable bastard in professional wrestling for a long time with that anger towards Goldberg. You could have seen him develop into somebody. I'm trying to think of someone who lasted a long time and became a long-term positive influence through their association, like Undertaker. Would he have been like Undertaker?
Like, look, there are lots of wrestlers who will still to this day tell you that you're a Bret. The great debate in wrestling: are you a Bret or a Shawn guy? That's one of the great debates with any wrestler. tappedoutpod@gmail.com. Send in your votes, because I know there's a bunch of the talents out there that listen. And I've heard both. I've heard both of those, by the way. And because here's the thing: if it also, to me, how it changes the future is, I think that we get this Hart Foundation DX feud. How long does that last if all of these? Because when Bret leaves, eventually Davey leaves, and all these, like, Owen stays with, or does he still feuding against? Who does he stay? Or no, him and Bulldog stay with Bret.
Does he even get the Blue Blazer gimmick if Bret stays?
No, because I think I think the Hart Foundation stays as a group, and they keep that off of him, and they feud with DX for Lord knows how long. It could have been like a decade. It could have been a Horseman, Dusty feud for a decade. You have no clue. But then of course the biggest one is if he never leaves, he obviously stays with WWE, because there was nowhere else really for him to go at the time. And now imagine all of the runs we get with Bret Hart versus Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, Edge. All these guys, we get their matches as they coming into the business, and he kind of accelerates their learning curve. That's a pretty nifty one to think about a little bit, I think, So, the argument would be, obviously, is if Bret's still there, does that change the whole Monday Night Wars and as a whole? Does Shawn retire? Does he stay earlier? Does he come back? Like, it spiraled. Like, the running thing of the butterfly effect is a real thing.
Does he lose his smile? I mean, does Shawn? I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. And this all just ties into. I mean, this all affects WWE, NWO, WCW, and how would that generate now that the NWO is in WWE? Would the NWO have developed as well without Bret Hart in WCW?
Oh, so yeah. To me, here's the funny thing is, I think Bret had zero influence on the NWO. I know he was in it. I know they did the splits. I know he was, part of it, against it, all that. I just don't really think that he changed the course of anything. I don't think he affected WCW hardly in a grand scale way of anything. I hate to say that, because I think he's one of the best technical wrestlers in the world. But to ask your what if question, with the NWO post WCW shutting down, what if the NWO never came to WWE? They bought, here's the thing. What if, when they run Rush Hour, here, let me ask you this. First of all, they do the invasion angle. They don't get any of these guys. They don't get Hogan. They don't get Hall. They don't get Nash. None of that. Ever. So when Vince purchases them, they eventually use second-tier talents, no disrespect to like a Booker T, who went on to be a Hall of Famer. But in 2002, he actually pays them enough because they all had those the AOL Time Warner money that they were all just going to sit at home and do nothing. Hey, don't fault them for that in the least. I get it and understand, but they finally get them in here. there's a question coming at the end of this to remind me to say, Nick, ask me your question about Vince, and I'll try to remember what my question was. So in 2002, he does bring them in. No Way Out, Hall, Nash, Hogan, they all kind of show up. Their version, it's. I know a lot of people think that it was. I just don't think the run was good there, for one.
Was it too late?
I think. Look, I don't think so. Here's what I think derailed it. With all due respect to all parties involved, Hall had already had he was really deep in the weeds in his issues. Kevin Nash, tremendous respect for the guy, but he just kept getting injured.
Tore his quad.
Hogan, 18 happens. WrestleMania happens with The Rock, and they just turned him. Those fans just turned him. WWE didn't want anything to do. Those fans didn't want anything to do with the bad guy Hulk, the Hollywood Hogan. They wanted like,
you can't. The gimmick was way too good. The old yellow and red gimmick was right. I mean, the Hollywood Hogan gimmick was Dookie. I hate to work that into the next show, but yeah, nobody wanted a heel Hogan in WWE. That was a WCW construct. You saw how they turned that match around, and then you get two guys that are. What are you going to do with them? I love the Outsiders, but they weren't in a position to. They weren't at their best. It was too late. They were past their prime as far as characters, and the entire attitude of wrestling had moved. They were a Monday Night War staple. They weren't for this period. This was not the time period for these guys.
Right. So now let's look at it from the sake of what if they actually don't go. WWE never brings in the NWO. Well, there's a huge one. It's a lot of money lost and left on the table. Let's leave that start.
Oh, that's yeah.
But the big one, a lot of people ask is, here's the way I look at it. 18 doesn't happen. No. We don't get Hogan Rock. So if Hogan, they never come in. We don't have the babyface flip at 18. And the last thing we remember of Hogan is Hollywood Hogan in NWO and WCW. Like, that's the last memory a lot of people probably have of him, right?
Yeah, that wouldn't have gone over well. That wouldn't have led to speaking at the Republican National Convention, Hulk Hogan. That wouldn't have led to I have a beer, Hulk Hogan. That wouldn't have led to,
It may have changed everything.
Time continuum. But it would have changed wrestling. Imagine not having Hogan associated with WWE again. I think he would have came back eventually, but without the other two guys, I think it would have been a bigger deal to get him back. It probably would have been harder.
Could have been. Triple H, when he returned in 2002, they were pushing the NWO at the time. So if the NWO is not there, because here's the thing, people forget, Triple H, Chris Jericho, great match at WrestleMania 18. Nobody remembers it because it happened on the same card as Hogan Rock. So that would have probably been the match that everybody in hindsight remembers on 18, potentially, as the big one as well. Of course, then you've also got, if the NWO's not there, you don't end up with that. Hall versus Austin was just bad at WrestleMania. So we don't get that. Do we get The Rock and Austin longer? Does that feud continue? And that's essentially runs all the way through, Austin's final run. His whole final, 2003 just probably looks the world a bit different. So
we got to realize how much little things affect the space-time wrestling continuum. This came in and they didn't have a spot for a guy, and that guy didn't go on to success because somebody else took their spot. just the smallest thing. Well, look at the New Day storyline right now, which was stopped by somebody filing a false claim on Odyssey Jones. That they had to redo the entire New Day storyline because of that. That's one small, tiny talent thing, and that's affected all these other people around them. And so this could have really changed the entire scene. If this is a massive thing, so it could have
Well,
been massive.
speaking of massive, here's the good one. I segued in the beginning of there when I talked about the money. It's the merch money that I was leading into, the money they left on the table. To this day, the NWO shirts are still one of the top selling shirts. It's just hand over fist money. All those guys are still making money. The question is, if they never come in with that nostalgia play for that NWO shirt, and we don't have the NWO shirt, WWE doesn't look. One thing that I'm going to slide part two of that question that I was going to ask you in here. We know Vince doesn't like to highlight anything that he didn't do. Like, did he bring them in thinking he was just going to bury them and then like put a knife in their, into the heart, the last strong piece of WCW, the NWO? He was going to put them in.
That could have been his motivation.
But here's the thing. I think he helped in the long thing, putting that product out there, the nostalgia, that shirt still selling or whatever. I believe there's a lot of people who currently today fondly look back at WCW because of the legacy that WWE kind of helped push. So it kind of backfired if that's what he was hoping to accomplish, that it did kind of prop up some, nostalgia feels about WCW.
But he made a shitload of money off that nostalgia. And Vince has always been the one who could milk nostalgia for cash. I mean, he's like, get every penny. So maybe. And that was the second part of the question, so I don't have to remind you the whole thing, because that's been a tough one. That was a lot of thought. But emotional situations like our emotional attachment NWO is very relative to your next topic, Watcher.
Well, look, the next one we're going to get into is, what if Daniel Bryan had never been forced to retire? So the backstory, obviously, everybody's fully aware. In 2014, he had become, he was one of the top wrestlers, the underdog story, all of that kind of stuff. He ends up winning WrestleMania 30. He beats Triple H, Randy Orton, Batista all in one night to become the champion. But of course, he suffered the concussions, his neck injuries, all of that kind of stuff. He's forced to relinquish the title. He did go on. He won the Intercontinental Championship at 31. He was hurt again. And so in 2016, he's completely forced to retire due to medical concerns. Like, he's out. After he retired, he became the SmackDown general manager. By the way, I thought that was some of his best work. A lot of people are like, it gets glossed over. I thought that was some of his best work, because I think that's, to me personally, a lot of where he grew into character more than just, being like, I'm one of the best wrestlers on the planet.
Okay, where he developed his character when he was
correct. He became more character. Yeah, he was more character based. Well, he couldn't wrestle, so he didn't have a choice in the matter. So he tried and he tried and he tried, to get cleared. Finally, he does. He returns at 34. He's got his run. He's the new Daniel Bryan. Leads all the way up to Kofi Kingston at WrestleMania 35. Then, of course, obviously, they have their visions, I think, WWE, of what they wanted him to be. He wanted to wrestle a certain way, etc. And in 2021, he parts ways with WWE and heads on over to AEW and becomes basically, probably, I would argue, one of the top flag bearer for them.
I don't think they could do it without him, to be honest with you. I really don't think they would have been able to force the brand they have. He gave them instant legitimacy. When they hired the guys they hired to start with, Daniel Bryan, Cody Rhodes, Dean Ambrose, those were big wrestling. Those were guys' names, CM Punk. I realize Kenny Omega and the Bucks are huge wrestling names, but they're not super household wrestling names. Okay? You couldn't go upstairs and ask my wife who's Kenny Omega, who the Bucks are. But if I were to ask them who Cody Rhodes and who was Daniel Bryan or who's CM Punk, they would know instantly. She knows instantly because those are household names. Daniel Bryan was very important to the start of the company. They may have never gained traction without him. I think, and him being around and being able to coach these younger guys has been massively helpful.
I think he helped maintain their momentum. They had a lot going into it just because they were the shiny new toy. Sound like a promo from John Cena there. They were the shiny new toy. That's kind of why they were getting, and are they? Yeah, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But so the question is though, if Daniel Bryan he's never forced to retire, he never leaves the WWE because for one, let's kind of assume that's probably the case. We'll get to that at the end, but everybody was pushing back. Think about this: Roman Reigns, when he first started getting booed so hard, why was that? Oh, I don't know. It's because he won a Rumble that everybody wanted, Bryan Danielson to win. That was the beginning because everybody was like, "Oh, he's the guy. He should be the top babyface." And if he doesn't get injured and go away, does the WWE come around and go give the fans what they want, and do they pump the brakes a little bit on Roman Reigns and slow down his epic rise, if you want to call it that he has?
So he wouldn't be like, what was that reign he had as champion? 1,000-something days as world champion. He wouldn't come back and show up to surprise people on Monday Night Raw, and it'd be the biggest news in wrestling just because he showed up one time. Roman Reigns is phenomenal as far as his media crossover, and without Daniel Bryan, would there be a Roman Reigns? Would there be a space?
With Daniel Bryan?
That's what I'm saying. Without Daniel Bryan there to give somebody to contrast against when he left, that means Roman Reigns meant more. He was the hated one. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I mean, he was still been with Seth Rollins and wearing those stupid tactical vests.
Look, we'll jump some of the notes here. The other one, the Yes movement, that was as hot as. Look, think about that. People to this day still do the yes and the no thing. Like it's as bad as the what chant, at wrestling shows. If he doesn't leave, does that keep going? We get into 14s, the 15s. Does he get a longer title reigns if he's not injured and leaves? Does he, the whole thing, does he get to keep is he feuding with John Cena? Seth
is he
Rollins,
in a wheelchair? Roman, right? If he continues to push at that when it was bad at first, is he crippled now?
Well, no. That's the whole what if is what if he was not forced to retire due to injury? Like if he's not forced to retire
at all,
move on
at all. He still had the injuries. Okay.
No.
If he didn't have the injuries, this would have been amazing. But
right.
If he'd have kept going and injured himself and kept going and not had to stop intermittently, I think it would have been a lot worse on him.
Right, because then it's, but I think that the whole what if is if he's not injured, he's not forced to retire at all, so he's healthy. We got to go. That's the what if. Because then it's also like when he comes back, because you remember when he left and he came back.
Oh, that comeback, that final comeback was massive.
So when he does the heel thing, that's what leads to Kofi Mania. He wrestles Kofi Kingston at WrestleMania. But if Bryan's not, think about it, if he never leaves, is he still the top babyface? There is no villain for Kofi to face. So does Kofi Mania even happen? Because that's the whole, it was built up to be that Bryan was the first, he was the perfect villain to face off with the Kofi Kingston character. That's why we got it.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, the last one I want to throw out here, because this is kind of, you kind of start there and you come back there at the end on these kind of conversations, is if he's never forced to retire, he's not got the injuries. Look, does he go to AEW because he wanted to wrestle a certain way? He wanted to do some certain things. WWE didn't want to allow him. They didn't want him to wrestle because of his injuries and all those things. So if none of those exist, does he even have a reason to want to leave and go to AEW and join the Blackpool Combat Club and all that kind of stuff? So does he even leave at all? Or does he just stay and ride that train out?
No, he would have been a company man and stayed forever had he got what he wanted. I mean, is he still married to Brie?
Mhm.
Okay, so he got a WB wife. He got a WWE job. He would have been happy Mr. WWE, and I wouldn't blame him. I don't think he would have ever left. I mean, I wouldn't have left. I would have been doing something in the company. I mean, think about if he was at NXT right now, helping these kids. How much would we be benefiting from that? I don't think NXT could be any better. But what if he was down there?
It would change a lot of, like I said, because is he still, if he's still wrestling up until he stopped within the last year. We're talking this guy still would have been on TV. And there's questions to ask of like, hey, if the shadow of Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan, whatever you want to call him, is still in the WWE, do the fans just continue to just dump all over Roman Reigns as they're trying to get him up that hill? Are the fans just pushing back and pushing back? So it's like, do we even get that? Do we get, if AEW starts and they have a top baby face and does Cody come back? If Bryan, now I think yes. The only reason I say that is I think their career paths are heading in two different directions. Danielson's on the way out. Cody's kind of on the rise up. I think that still happens. But when you go back over the last 6 years in your head of who doesn't get that top spot because Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan he's still a top guy at that point, and he still can go in the ring. He's still proven he can do it. So he's riding that top spot. So, a lot of these what ifs are about guys leaving, jumping ship or whatever, all that kind of stuff. So here's one that'll hit probably right in your wheelhouse. It's in 1991. What if Ric Flair doesn't leave WCW and jump to the WWF at the time in 1991?
Okay, so this, folks, is the year we graduated high school. I studied on this. I watched the video because, in Alabama, we didn't get cable TV till long after I left home. This was on one of those little talk shows WB did. Format, with the announcer guy in a suit holding the mic. Bobby Heenan came out and was talking with the big gold belt, made him roll out a red carpet, did the whole thing about the greatest professional wrestler in the world, the real champion. Flair comes out, it's regal, and then they have this entire storyline based on Flair. This was impressive. I mean, Heenan, everything Bobby Heenan did to me, it was wonderful. But this right here, getting Flair over from the jump, even if you didn't know who Flair was, Bobby Heenan got him over to the WWE audience from the jump with that massive like whole presentation thing that they can't. I don't even think they can do that anymore. It's so good. But
yeah. And so you're probably going to ask, wait, how do we even get here, right? Like, how do we even get there?
Oh, this is crazy.
So basically, Ric Flair obviously was WCW. He was NWA, WCW. Like, he was the guy. However, Jim Herd and him had some tension. Stuff's kind of, butting head. Herd wanted to go with the younger guys, but Flair, he just kind of was like ready to move on, even trying to think about giving him the stupid pay cuts, Spartacus gimmicks, all this kind of stuff. Essentially, it all leads to him being fired in July of 91. By the way, they're idiots in the sense that they do this as he is the world champion. They let this happen. So that's how, so that's the one when you were talking about, hey, he leaves with the title. He's like, I'm the real world champion, shows up, the Bobby Heenan segment happens, and then, hey, we got the real world champion, Ric Flair, with the belt. He goes up there. He's going to feud with Hogan, Savage, Bret Hart, a lot of other people while he's there. But, of course, down in WCW, they're panicking. They don't have a chance. Like, they essentially let their champion walk. So then they've got to run with, like, Luger, Sting, Ron Simmons, a lot of those guys. They're trying to hurry up and bring them up to fill those gaps of not having their top guy. So then it becomes, if he doesn't go, we start asking our questions. Well, one, you started off the storyline. There's no real world champion storyline in WWE if he doesn't go.
No, and off the subject real quick. Have you ever heard anybody say anything nice about Jim Herd?
Not really.
No, I've never heard anybody say a nice word about Jim Herd. I don't know anything about him. I'm just basing on other people's opinions. But he let a champion leave, not because of anything bad. At a time where you developed nothing around him. You didn't you didn't have a strong person. Now I can see why you wouldn't have strong personalities around Flair. Okay, Flair is just a absolute monster personality. But you should have been developing other people. You let him go. Well, you started messing with him prior to starting. You didn't even have anything developed, and you start messing with him. And so you push him out basically, and you got nothing. And he goes to the biggest competitor in the world and proves how valuable he is to your company.
Yeah,
That's insane.
but it leads to a lot of questions. Like I said, if he doesn't go, the '92 Rumble is for the title. So if he's not there, remember the other two are the Hogan, Sid Justice to pull out. So that was kind of your other big story. Do one of those guys win instead? Does Hogan jump right back into that main? He's the top guy. We go from there. Speaking of Hogan, when he eventually does jump to WCW, if Flair doesn't go to WWF in '91, the first time we probably get Hogan, well, I'll say probably the first time we get Hogan Flair is in WCW.
Yeah, that's not even when you wanted to see it though.
No, I don't know, man, because then they tried to sell it like Hogan, Hogan Flair. Look, if you ever want to hear one of my big, like, I think they dropped the ball on it, WWF gives us Flair Hogan. It was like at a live event. It wasn't even like they didn't give it to us on. It should have been a Mania match. It wasn't.
Yeah, that's a legendary. That would have been a legendary Mania
Right.
match.
So that's what I'm saying. They screwed the pooch on that one. So if WCW is the first time, I think it probably adds more when they're trying to turn their company around. Right out of the gate, one of the first, like, because they gave us Flair Hogan, but we'd already seen it. We'd already seen it on, in WWF at the time. So I'm like, now, no, WCW, could they have taken advantage? Because it boosts them up sooner than later.
Yeah.
So they could have gotten momentum earlier. And then, by the way, do they have the momentum because Flair never left to begin with? They don't have that sputter. They just kind of ride that train and push all the way through. I think so. But I want to ask that question at the end. But we also, by the way, we don't get Flair and Bret when they're in WWE. They had their feud. So if we don't have Flair, who's Bret feud with there to help get there? It'd be the usual suspect at that point. I mean, it's because here's the thing, it clearly didn't look like because they're both babies. You're not going to get it out of Hogan. So is it Sid? Is it Sid Justice? Is that the path to the title for? It messes up a lot of stuff. So does Flair retire sooner than that? Than he did. He ended up doing. So
did he retire? I mean,
well, has he ever actually retired? They look. Conrad and Jeff talk about it a lot.
We saw him in November, and he was still hitting on midgets in the hotel bar. I mean, he's a character, folks. He's a force of personality, and that guy. It's hard to predict what he would have done, but
so I'm going to ask you this. This is a crazy take, and I'm gonna let you run with this one. Flair was, to this day, is considered like a lot of people say he's the greatest world champion of all time. Okay. Did the WWF run that he had cement his legacy by presenting him to a group of people that had not seen him before? Because he was a WCW NWA guy. So even there were a lot of people even in that time period. And it's just tough for us to grasp. And if you didn't live in this area, it's really hard to wrap your head around. there were still a lot of people that were like, well, Flair's the other champion. Hogan's the champion. Like, he's the WWF guy. And then, or Bruno, or whatever, at certain times, depending on who was the champion during your runs. Did he need that WWF run, as short and as brief as it was, to be exposed to the much bigger market, to get out there to that audience, to make him to continue to be the guy he is today?
Well, I'm gonna give you something I'm embarrassed about. But you got to remember now, I grew up watching WWE syndication, tape pay-per-views, and my local promotion, Ron Fuller's Continental or Southeastern, whatever it was called at the time. And Flair might have come to town for them, but for the whole thing, I knew who Ric Flair was, but I never got to see him. And my first exposure, I knew who Ric Flair was. I knew what the big gold belt was. My first real exposure to Flair was on WWE television.
My point. You just proved my point, right?
Yeah. That's the first time I saw Flair and wrestle. And he was the interloper. He was the guy coming in from the company I didn't know to mess up the company I did. And he felt like a invader. He felt like a bad guy, a villain coming in there. And had this not happened, it might have been 94, 93, 94 before I ever got to know who Hogan was. Flair was. It might have been 98 when the Monday Night Wars were running, before I got to know who Flair was. And that was not a time to know who Flair was. But I would have missed it. This was my introduction. I would have missed it had it not been for this run. And hell, didn't this run help him when he went back to the NWA? WCW?
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. When he comes back, they're off to the races again. They're doing their thing.
I said, it's for people in certain markets. You had 605. You had what, 57 hours of wrestling every Saturday night.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had maybe an hour on Sunday.
Now listen, as a kid in Florida, I had the 1 hour show on Saturday. That was it.
Yeah.
Championship Wrestling from Florida. That's all I had.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's what I keep telling people. It's it's hard to wrap your head around that times were so different way back when, and that to say something that simple.
You know where I saw Flair? I would see him on the cover of wrestling magazines at the newsstand on Piggly Wiggly, and he was always covered in blood.
But that's what I'm saying. That's so to actually get exposed to his work and seeing him in the ring and hearing him talk or whatever. A lot of people didn't see it, so I think there is a hindsight of he needed that. I don't know. I get it. He's great and he's probably the greatest of all time. Blah 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 whatever. But without that little run, I would love to know what people think what does he become if he does not have that run? tappedoutpod@gmail.com. We're going to do one more. We're going to get one more. I'm going to scroll through the notes, Myron. I'm skipping one or two of them.
No.
This one seems, once I start, you'll know where I'm at.
Okay.
I'm choosing this one just because it's super relevant to the current time. Is what if CM Punk never left the WWE in 2014? Look, he's back now, all of that kind of stuff. So we're going to jump to this one. I think it's only one ahead. I jumped over one.
Okay, right after Flair went to CM Punk. Well, he probably would have died from that infection.
Well, let's let the table first. So in 2014, Punk, he was the champ. He had been the champ for 434 days. He was headlining all the major pay-per-views except for WrestleMania. However, that's why he was getting frustrated. Creative. He was just, where he was in the company. Yes, he did have the health stuff. But the big one, we all feel like he completely felt like he got disrespected when he did not get the main event at WrestleMania. He just burned out. Look, he a lot of this stuff is stuff he has come out now and actually said afterwards. So after the Rumble, he walked out of the company, had a falling out, had the lawsuit with the doctors, like you brought it up, does the whole podcast with Colt Cabana. That's all, here nor there at this point. But when he did leave, we have to remember, again, folks, is there a base that this is so long ago that you're like, they don't know or don't understand this? So when he leaves, there's a void there for that spot. Now look, we talked about Daniel Bryan early. Eventually, he kind of fills that spot with the yes movement and all that kind of stuff. But for 7 years, he walked away, didn't wrestle anywhere. He did the MMA. Believe it or not, he wrote some Marvel comics. Some people don't know that. But eventually, yes, he does come back in AEW in 2021. So the question though is, how does it look different if he just doesn't leave? Period. Somehow, some way, they smooth it over. I don't know whether he gets a Mania, whatever. We'll get to there in a minute. But we're going to come back to this guy because we talked about him earlier. If Punk doesn't leave, and we jokingly said that Daniel Bryan essentially kind of filled that void for look, I called it the super indie guy. That's kind of what I felt like he was.
That makes sense, yeah.
So if Punk never leaves and he goes on and he faces Triple H and all that kind of stuff or whatever, like up at the WrestleMania 30, which is eventually where Bryan, faces all of those guys, in one night and wins, does Bryan even get that opportunity? Like, because we have that spot filled by CM Punk.
Punk was hot, man. Would there have been any opportunity for Daniel Bryan in a Punk-like world? I mean, he was the realistic guy. He was the guy who was anti-establishment. He was the guy that was different than everyone else. And was there a spot for somebody who was different, even in a good way, but different? Daniel Bryan was a smaller guy who had a massive movement behind him, but they were still chanting CM Punk till the day he came back. Whatever he did made a huge impact on them, and him leaving left a massive void that forced some kind of development and some kind of way. They tried to reach out to fans, and it did affect the way they wrote characters until now.
Right. So if Punk doesn't leave, do the fans have their? Do they have their? And I don't mean the feel of it, but they have their guy. So they don't need to fill that spot. So does Bryan not get that spot? Because look, we even talk about WrestleMania 30. Originally, sources say, rumors say that Punk was supposed to wrestle Triple H at 30 in a grudge match. The whole authority, all that kind of stuff. So they're supposed to face. Well, if that's where we're heading, then we don't need Bryan. The question becomes, though, I'll ask you, if Punk does get this match, do they actually put him over, or do they just bury him? I mean, do they pull a Sting on him and just completely hey, we gave you your shot, we're going to beat you, and we're going to move on? So that becomes a question.
Well, that would not have worked either. If they'd have gave him a spot and buried him, it wouldn't have, he'd have done something similar, I would believe. He was very dissatisfied. The thing with the WWE doctor, from everything I've read, was absolute bullshit. That should have never happened, based on my medical experience. I don't understand the Colt Cabana thing, because they're bitter enemies now, apparently. I always thought he would be dissatisfied wherever he went. The fight in AEW proved to me he would be dissatisfied everywhere he went. And now he's doing some of the best work I've ever seen done at all with that massive feuds, and how he's done everything since his WWE return. That cage match, the things he's done, the promos he's cut, the fact he's made me like him after thinking he was a massive douchebag for all this time. It's worked. So I don't even know what to think, Nick. I've had an opinion about him for years that's now changed. What? How does it work? If he'd have stayed, would he have been that positive person? Maybe he had to go out and not wrestle for all that time. Write the comic books, MMA, go to AEW, deal with a bunch of idiots,
Well, let me
and
interview
then come
there.
back.
So if he doesn't leave, then does he ever even go to AEW? Like, because I mean, if he's there, if he stays, he gets everything. Like, look, does he continue to? Because people, it's hard to wrap your head around. There was a point. Like, think about it. It was him and John Cena. They were the rivals. They were at their peaks going through. Eventually, obviously, everybody goes. He moved on from John Cena to Triple H. If he doesn't leave and he moves on to Triple H, he's at the top. He's dealing with the top players. He had the thing with Taker at Mania. You know what I mean? So he's at that top level. People, there's a reason why they chanted his name for all those times. People literally thought he was like literally the guy. So if he's the guy, does he go on to get a little bit of control, kind of like the Triple H's and the Takers and the Cenas, where they do get a little bit of, they get to be heard in Vince's ear at the time and get a little, I don't want to call it creative control, but a little bit of, little influence in what goes on or whatever. If he has all that, why even leave? Because by the time he gets to, where he's thinking about it, he's probably like, he's just a part-timer, like Taker, like Cena, he's older and they probably agree to that kind of thing. Or he's like Edge in that little window when Edge came back and was there for part-time. I think he's a part-time guy, but even earlier, and he's just happy and content staying there. So I don't think he makes the jump at all.
I don't know. I mean, he had to, like a lot of us, had to go through experiences in that time of our lives that changed us the person we are now, as age old men, and going and dealing with a bunch of punk ass kids, in my opinion, like a Jungle Boy, had a lot to do with me valuing the things and being around older people. Uh, maybe he would be a different person, but this is what we got. And I like this CM Punk now. Maybe this all happened, so I would like him finally.
Could be. Now, speaking of liking, look, part of the issue of why NXT did thrive, why AEW thrived, WWE's product, we talk about it all the time when we go back, hey guys, it wasn't all that long ago that everybody was just crapping on the WWE product. If Punk doesn't go, by the time, again, you start to do these time frames in your head. If he's got the influence, he's got a little of the creative control we were talking about, does he kind of help those storylines not get stale? Because if he's involved in the stories, he's kind of keeping his stuff edgy, keeping it better. It kind of pushes and challenges everybody across the board to be better. And do we not get all of those?
Does it reduce that dull period? Basically, is what you're saying, where WWE was not cool. Does his presence and his coolness or his relativity give them better storylines so that they don't become or they don't have to run smaller buildings, or they didn't fail, but it was not a good time to be a wrestling fan.
Listen, AEW was only this is a hot take. The only reason they were successful is because everybody was like, WWE sucks, it's stale, it's boring. And because look, when they started, they were hot. Why they were hot? Because there were a lot of people that were pushing back on anti-WWE. They were anti-WWE, and they wanted something else.
Well, when we started doing this, most of the stuff we were talking about was old wrestling. We weren't really the new WWE product wasn't really anything to talk about. I mean, until AEW came about and there was some kind of competition, and CM Punk had a giant part of that.
Well, let me ask you, because one of the things that I always hear that the biggest critiques of him is that he is demanding of everybody because of the amount of work he's willing to put in. He wants to be, some people say he tries to be a perfectionist, so he expects everybody else to try to be a perfectionist. So if he's there during all that run, is just from being able to give any input, is he trying to shove that floor as it's lowering? The floor is getting lower and lower. Is he helping trying to push it up? It's a curious thing to think about. Does he have any? If he stays longer, is he in the ear of Vince and creative in general, and being able to help just make the product better across the board during those dips?
Or does he never get into the ear of Triple H if he stays in the ear of Vince?
It's a good one, but look, we all know that him leaving kind of changed wrestling across the board. Going to AEW gave them a little boost for a while or whatever. My take is if he doesn't leave, they don't get the boost. If the product's better, does AEW even have a successful run that it has at the beginning?
There wouldn't have been a need for him.
That's the good question. Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, those are the ones we can get to today. Obviously, we'll be back probably in the next month or so. We'll be doing this again. And obviously, look, we will post those. You'll know ahead of time if you're a member at patreon.com/tappedoutpod. You can be able to just to message those. When we post it, you'll be able to comment it, or you can message us or tappedoutpod@gmail.com. We're going to roll all the ones over that we got from the people that sent them in that we did not get to. We'll roll those over to the next show as well. So we'll keep that running. But again, make sure you're becoming a Patreon member, even if it's free. So you get the Georgia Wrestling Spotlight. You get all of the TV episode reviews, PLE reviews, all that good stuff. But of course, if you're a paying member, you get the show early and you get the extra bonus content there as well. And of course, we brought it up. We get it. This show's on YouTube. We're a YouTube show. We understand that. Tappedoutpod.com. Make sure you're liking all of the videos, subscribe to the page, click that little bell, turn the notifications on. That way you don't miss a single episode, because you never know. We might start dropping a thing or two here and there between the Patreon and the YouTube. We'll see how that all shakes out or whatever. But again, send your thoughts, tappedoutpod@gmail.com, about the change in the formats, the questions, all the things we're asking. And again, follow us on social media, TappedOutPod, everywhere at TappedOutPod. It's because we will put these kind of notifications up on when we're going to do these again, and any feedback. And we want you guys to help program the show.
Oh, that's unique. That's unique, but don't CM Punk us. Don't catch us in the back room and Jack Perry us.
Yeah. But anything else, man? I mean, I had fun doing these. I like these.
Oh, that was a lot of fun. When I get these scripts, I'm like, I go through them, and well, they're not scripts, they're ideas really. And I watch what I can, and I do whatever research I can, but they bring up a lot of fun and good memories. So this has been a unique thing to do, besides just grinding through daily product and wrestling rumors and digging through stuff like that. This is fun for me.
Yeah. And look, we got there's some concepts out there. We know we got a lot of talents who listen to the show as well. I had a conversation with a couple talents about doing some of these as specials.
Oh yeah,
they come in and do it. Where they're some of the some talents, promoters, owners, all that kind of stuff. Those will be fun as well. I had someone pitch me doing one of the movies for The Real Wrestling last night, about doing a movie, and I was like, okay, I'm in. Let's do
what
it.
Movie? What movie?
Anchorman.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm kind of
I thought you were going to say another wrestling movie.
No. I encouraged it not to be a wrestling movie if it's one of the wrestlers doing it. So, because me and you will do as many of the ones with wrestlers and wrestling movies and all that kind of stuff as possible. But, well, man, anything else before we get out of here today?
Nah, man, I had a blast. I enjoy doing these things. Thanks, folks, for listening.
Well, what's the old saying, man? If I've got nothing and you've got nothing, what time is it?
Time to tap out.